"Can I stay for tonight?" Native princess knocked on his door. Lonely rancher fell at her feet. Under a restless western sky, the last light of dusk stretched long shadows across the open prairie. The air smelled of sage and smoke, and the horizon burned with the fading gold of another sun slipping behind the hills. The ranch house stood solitary against it all, its clapboard walls weathered, its windows dim except for one lantern flickering in the front room. Inside, Elias Crow sat heavy in his chair, one hand wrapped around a glass of whiskey he hadn't sipped. His wealth, broad acres, cattle that dotted the plains, horses worth more than most men's livelihoods, felt as hollow as the empty chair across from him. His wife's portrait hung above the mantel, catching the light just enough to remind him of what the house had lost. He had become a man admired from afar and pitted up close, his neighbors calling him fortunate while their eyes carried a quiet, condescending grief on his behalf. He wanted silence, yet silence ate at him. He wanted company, yet company felt like betrayal. It was then the knock came, so gentle he thought at first it was the wind. A second time, more certain, and his hand froze halfway to his lips. 4 years no one had come uninvited. Curiosity pricked at his chest, edged with fear of what he might find or worse what he might feel. He set down the glass and rose, the floorboards creaking as though they too braced for intrusion. When he opened the door, lantern light spilled across the porch and onto the figure standing there. She wore a cloak of midnight blue trimmed with beads that glimmered faintly like scattered stars. Beneath it, the shape of traditional finery showed, woven skirts, delicate feathers tucked into her dark braids, bracelets that caught the dim light as though holding fragments of dawn. Her face was young, though not untouched by sorrow. She stood with the bearing of someone raised to be seen yet exiled to remain unseen. Her eyes, black as polished obsidian, studied him not as a man of wealth but as a man of solitude. "Can I stay for tonight?" Her voice was low, carrying both dignity and fatigue. Elias felt the words hang in the air like smoke. He should have asked who she was, where she had come from, why she appeared on his porch in the dying light. Yet none of those questions left his mouth. He only saw how she carried herself, straight-backed, unflinching, though her hands trembled slightly beneath the weight of her bundle. He thought of how neighbors would whisper if they saw her inside his home. He thought of the portrait above the mantel, of his wife's soft eyes, of vows long past and wounds still fresh. His hand tightened on the doorframe. Still he stepped aside. "Come in," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She entered without hesitation, though her gaze swept the room as if cataloging its emptiness. The fire had dwindled to embers, and the air inside was thick with the musk of leather, wood smoke, and loneliness. She set her bundle gently against the wall, her movements precise, practiced, careful not to disturb more than necessary. Elias stood back, uncertain if he had invited comfort or disruption into his space. The silence that followed pressed on them both. He realized with a strange start that she had not offered her name, nor had he asked. Curiosity curled in him again, soft and insistent. She finally spoke, eyes fixed on the dying fire. "My people call me Ayanna Redbird." The name fit her, something both fragile and fierce. He repeated it under his breath, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. She glanced at him then, her expression unreadable, though something flickered there, perhaps recognition of his effort, or perhaps pity at his uncertainty. "You've traveled far," he said. She nodded, but gave no further explanation. That should have been the end of it, yet he wanted more, as if each word she withheld was another mystery left hanging between them. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the chair across from his. "You can rest here a while." She sat, back straight, hands folded on her lap. The firelight licked across her face, drawing out angles both soft and sharp, painting her eyes with reflections that seemed too old for her years. For a moment, Elias thought of all the nights he had stared into flames alone, and how the fire had never once seemed to look back. They spoke little. The house creaked around them, the storm outside building with the low mutter of thunder. When she leaned forward and placed another log on the fire, Elias stiffened. It had been years since anyone but him had tended to that hearth. But she did it naturally, without presumption, as if she had always belonged to the rhythm of flame and wood. A small act, yet it unsettled him more than any bold gesture could have. The storm outside swelled, wind pressing against the walls like a restless spirit. Elias studied her in the shifting glow, drawn to the quiet resilience in her stillness. He wanted to ask why she had come, what exile or sorrow had driven her here. He wanted to know if she had chosen his door at random or if fate had led her across the wild grass to this very house. But his questions tangled with shame, with the fear that by asking, he would be admitting he longed to know her story at all. It was she who broke the silence. "Storms cleanse the earth," she said softly, watching sparks rise from the fire. "The old spirits say they strip away what must be left behind." Her voice carried the weight of memory, and Elias felt something stir, something close to envy. He had clung to his grief like armor, yet here was a woman speaking of storms as if they could be endured and survived. He leaned forward, drawn by the music in her words. "Do they cleanse sorrow?" he asked before he could stop himself. Her gaze met his. "If one is willing to let go." The air between them thickened with that truth. He thought of his late wife's smile, of the way he had frozen his heart the night she was buried, vowing never to let it beat for anyone else. He thought of the empty chair, of the untouched whiskey, of the long years measured only in work and silence. Letting go felt like betrayal. Yet holding on had left him half alive. Ayanna lowered her eyes, her hands tightening briefly in her lap. "I was meant to be a leader for my people. They saw in me strength until I questioned the path laid before me. A princess who will not obey is no princess at all." Her voice cracked only once, a seam in otherwise unshaken dignity. "So I walk." Elias felt the confession land in him like rain on dry earth. He saw his own reflection in her words, both of them cast aside, bound by judgment they had not chosen. Shame met shame, sorrow met sorrow. And in that meeting something unspoken shifted. Their conversation slowed again, the fire's rhythm filling the spaces where words could not. At one point, their hands brushed as he passed her an empty cup, the touch so slight yet searing, a quiet confession neither dared speak aloud. Outside, the storm crashed at its peak, yet within the walls there was stillness, fragile, wholly new. By morning the storm had rolled away, leaving the earth rinsed clean. Sunlight spilled across the porch, touching the prairie with a softness that felt almost forgiving. Ayanna gathered her bundle without fuss, though Elias noticed the heaviness in her steps, the quiet resignation in her movements. She did not look at him as she reached for the door, as if bracing herself for rejection she had already anticipated. He stood at the hearth, watching her silhouette against the light. His heart beat with an urgency he had not felt in years, an urgency born not of desire but of the fear of losing something he did not yet fully understand. He opened his mouth, then closed it, the weight of choice pressing down. To let her leave would be safer, simpler, expected. To ask her to stay would be to admit he wanted more than silence. "Ayanna," he said, his voice breaking the morning quiet. She paused, her hand still on the door. "What if you stayed longer?" Her head turned slowly, her eyes wide. There was no promise in his words, no declarations of love, only the fragile beginning of something beyond grief. Companionship perhaps. Respect. A chance at building something together from what had been shattered. Her silence stretched, then softened. She gave the smallest nod, regal even in its simplicity, and set her bundle back down. In that moment the house seemed less empty, less haunted. Elias felt the first flicker of warmth not born of fire but of presence. They stepped outside together into the morning light, the prairie stretching endless before them, the air carrying the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. For the first time in years, Elias did not feel the weight of being alone. He felt instead the tremor of a story just beginning, one carved not in declarations but in gestures, not in thunder but in the quiet courage of two broken souls choosing to walk forward side by side. And though the world would whisper, though judgment would come like dust on the wind, he knew some truths lived beyond rumor. Some truths began with nothing more than a knock at the door, asking simply, "Can I stay for tonight?" Subscribe now to join the journey of untold Wild West love and destiny.